Hello everyone, I hope you had a beautiful Shabbos. Welcome to Transforming Your Relationships. A big thank you and shout out to Chazaq, Chickens for Shabbos and Torah Anytime, as well as to my esteemed co-presenter here, Rabbi David Goldwasser. You've got to make sure that you stay tuned after my talk in order to enjoy his wisdom. It's absolutely fascinating on Perkei Avos. You'll really learn a lot and I encourage you to stay tuned. So, we're speaking about transforming relationships. And today I'd like to talk about a couple of areas that people seem to have an issue with, and we'll see how much progress we make. So first off is like this. You know, when I speak to people, and I'm sure you do as well, and maybe you are that person, you know, it's natural for people to blame others for their problems. That's just what the ego does. Rather than take responsibility, that we blame others. Something called attribution error, by the way. In psychology, it says that we're more inclined to attribute our errors or our... I'm still, by the way, trying to figure out where the camera is on this thing. If someone wants to tell me, I don't know. So if I seem to have wandering eyes, it's because I'm always wondering where I think it's over there, but I don't know. I don't mean not to look at you, but okay. So attribution error basically says that we tend to attribute our own mistakes or errors or faults to other people, and other people's mistakes to themselves, meaning like this. Let's say that you are late arriving somewhere to meet somebody. You're going to be more inclined, or at least the ego will be more inclined, to refuse responsibility, to say, you know what, it was because of traffic, it's because you know, you left too late because somebody, you know, needed you for something, or whatever it is, you're less inclined to take responsibility. When it comes to other people who keep you waiting, of course, it's they didn't care enough, they didn't respect you enough, and so on. You're not likely to assume that it was due to external circumstances. Again, it's called attribution error. But what's fascinating is how this applies to childhood. And yes, it all begins in childhood. I always tell people, you know, when they come to my office, you know, I can say them, you know, 20 years. Just blame your mother and call it a day. It's always mom. And that's not the case, by the way, but that's mom, dad, whatever it is. And it's not to say that parents, you know, don't contribute or don't make it difficult for some kids out of the gate, but what we'll understand here is just the idea about blame, and not why it's just not productive, but how the logic is so flawed. And it works like this. You know, you take a child growing up and you know, now they're an adult. And by the way, I had somebody come to me recently, very sort of funny. I find these things funny, I guess, in time. Like Shakespeare said, comedy is tragedy plus time, or maybe Mark Twain. Anyway, he said that I'm sounding more and more like Rabbi Orlovsky. I don't know what that is. Okay, maybe I'm spending too much time with him, I don't know. So this guy comes anyway, so we're talking about taking responsibilities for your problems. He said, so you tell me that whatever damage a person causes, they need to take responsibility? I said, yeah. I said, of course. He said, okay, you know, send my mother the bill for the therapy sessions. I'm like, ba-dum-bum. Okay, so where are we? Yeah, so people are very inclined to blame their parents, blame other people. So, you know, typically a person say, my mother treated me this way and that way because, you know, she didn't like me, she didn't care about me. And by the way, it's natural for children who are egocentric to blame themselves, because who else could it be about but the center of the universe? Which is why any child that grows up in a home that is chaotic or unpredictable, much less abusive, you know, will always presume that it's because of a defect or deficiency within them. You know, no kid, a 7-year-old child is going to say, you know what, wow, dad had a hard day at work. You know what, yeah, he's screaming at me, but let him let off a little steam, he'll have a drink, calm down, and all is fine. No, the child naturally assumes, you know what, my father's doing this, my mother's doing this because there's something broken, bad, defective within me. Which is why as parents you have to be very, very careful. Anything you say and do, your child feels as if it is the complete reflection of their own self-worth. Now, as adults, we know better, but we don't. We know better, the neshama knows better, but the ego doesn't. The ego is still locked in this place that how people treat me is a reflection of my self-worth. Which, by the way, I think we touched on this last week, and that's that, you know, how somebody treats you is a confession of their character. It reveals everything about that person and speaks to their emotional health, but says nothing about you. You treat other people based on how you feel about yourself. If you love you, you can love other people. You respect yourself, you can respect other people. if you don't have it, what do you have to give? Rav Noach Weinberg Zatzal used to say, if you don't love you, don't love me. Now, doesn't mean a person that doesn't love themselves, and we all don't, most of us to some degree, we all have low self-esteem, except for me. But it's important to recognize that how somebody treats us has nothing to do with us. It's only the ego that makes it about us. You know, one of the examples I give a lot in my talks, and if you've been following me on Torah Anytime and you hit the follow button, you'll get all future talks and you won't have to wonder what we're talking about when we talk about it. So, you know, if you're at a chasana and somebody's, you know, comes over and starts screaming and says, you're a thief, you're a ganef, you're an awful human being, and all of a sudden a big crowd is forming around you and you're starting to feel very, very bad, embarrassed, uncomfortable. And then this person says, you know what? And another thing, Chaim Yaakov, we'll assume your name isn't Chaim Yaakov, and it's a mistake of case of mistaken identity. And you realize, as well as everyone else around you at that moment, that he's got the wrong guy. Now, rather than feel embarrassed or feel bad for yourself, you're starting to feel like, oh my gosh, when this guy realizes that he's screaming at the wrong person, he is going to feel like this big. And you're standing up straight, you're thinking, oh, everyone around you is going to think, why he's just a tzaddik. The next Yoel Gold story is going to feature you about, that tzaddik who didn't talk back at a wedding when he was being yelled at. So, it's a lot of noise here. So, it's important to recognize, again, how people treat you is a reflection of their self-worth. Let me just give you another example. Let's say you're in an amazing, expansive, great mood. Everything is going really, really well for you. How are you treating the people around you? You're treating them great, wonderful, top to the bottom. I mean, you do that anyway. You're a mensch or a menschess. But, you know, when you're in a better mood, an expansive mood, it's easier to go ahead and do that. But when you're in a negative state and you're just not feeling good, maybe you don't treat everyone with the proper cover, the proper respect. Now, did their self-worth change? Did they become less worthy as a human being? Of course not. But your ability to give, your capacity to give in that moment was stunted. And so from our perspective, we have to appreciate that how people treat us has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with them, their mood, how they feel about themselves. By the way, we talk about mood and self-esteem. Mood is the shadow of self-esteem. A person that's it generally has higher self-esteem is in a, largely speaking, assuming that we're not talking about pathology here, a more steady, higher mood. The lower our self-esteem, the lower our mood, and the more it fluctuates. The reason for this is because, just very briefly, is that the more self-esteem I have, the less dependent I am on other people to build up a faltering self-image, right? The ego and self-esteem are inversely related. So the more self-esteem I have, you know, the less I really care. It's not that I don't want people not to like me or respect me, but I know that how they treat me has nothing to do about me. But as my self-esteem decreases, my ego takes over, I begin to look at everything through an egocentric lens, which means how you treat me is a reflection of me. If I get 2 red lights in a row, it's because the universe hates me. If it's raining, it's because Hashem wanted to ruin my picnic. Everything's about me. So the lower our self-esteem, the more mood is going to fluctuate, because it's based on the capricious winds of whether or not things are bouncing in our direction or not. With higher self-esteem, I recognize that, you know what, everything isn't about me. Sidebar here is that everything is about us. The question is, the neshama says, this is Hashem, this is something Hashem is doing for me. The ego that says, this is something Hashem is doing to me. Meaning, the ego looks at everything in the lens of, wow, the world hates me, while as the neshama, the soul, the real part of us, tries to get the genuine message. So everything is about us insofar as we should take it personally, whether it's a leaf falling from a tree, any interaction, conversation, relationship, you know, any event or circumstance is a personal message for us. But we want to mine it for the positivity, for the good, rather than presume it's because our treatment is due to a defect or deficiency within us. And again, the larger the ego, so something we continue to stress here in the talks is that, you know, the larger the ego, the more we're going to take things personally, and we're going to assume it's because of a defect or deficiency within me. Now, something we alluded to way back when, I think, way back when, maybe in the beginning, the first talk, maybe a month ago, Motzi Shabbos, is about pathologies and personalities and how they can develop into personality disorders. And we're going to see that they're all sort of egocentric based. In terms of whether it's narcissistic, whether it's histrionic, whether it's borderline. They all have an ego that fears a sense of vulnerability and disconnection. The exception here is someone suffering with sociopathy, a sociopath. They, interestingly enough, recent studies have shown that they really do want connection, but because they are so cut off, they pretty much act and behave in a way that's completely autonomous, as if they don't. But interestingly enough, again, really super recent research shows that even people suffering with sociopathy, while they crave autonomy and control, they do also, somewhere deep down, also want connection. But machloches among psychological poskim. Anyway, I happen to be in that camp, though, that they do, but it's so corrupted, they're just not in touch with it. All right, now, how are we on time? Okay, so, okay, fine. So let me just go ahead and end with this, and then we'll get to this another time. You know, we talk about blame. That's how we started this whole zach. And, you know, so someone will come in, they'll blame their mother, their father, their parent, they'll blame other people for where they are, who they are, with their problems. But then when it comes to how they treat other people, right, they just throw up their hand and say, you know, I'm a victim. What can I do? You know, I grew up in this house. I was raised this way. I had this kind of environment. This is what happened to me. So yeah, I'm a domino. I got banged into, but I banged into you also. You know, what are you blaming me for? But now, why doesn't that person look at his parent, let's say, in the same lens? And a person, a child, let's go, grows up in a house that's less than ideal. Call it abusive, call it tumultuous, chaotic, whatever it is. So they'll go ahead, whether justified or unjustified, they'll blame the parent. Now this child grows up with a whole host of issues and problems and this and that. Blame, blame, blame. His treatment of others, whether it's disrespect, whether it's abuse, his treatment of himself, whether he becomes addicted to drugs, alcohol, whatever it is always not because I'm lacking responsibility, I'm not making good choices, but I was raised in such a way, I was treated in such a way that this is the inevitable outcome. I was funneled and I had no other choice. Now, why doesn't this person look at the person who abused or injured or their parent, whoever it is, the same way? In other words, why do you assume they had bechira, they had choice? Maybe their upbringing, which it was so awful, they had no choice. But again, it's the Yetzer Hara, the ego, that says, you know what? I'm a victim, right, of somebody else who had choice, but now I will behave as if I have no choice. Do you see the inherent flaw in that logic? And the ego just sells us on that story. Very quickly, we go ahead and just blame to the left, and then refuse to accept responsibility to the right. Meaning, what happened to me in the past is because of how I was treated. Okay, fair enough. But we blame that person. In other words, if you're not blaming you for how you treat the person to your right, why are you blaming the person to the left of you for how they treated you? Why is it everyone has bechira, everyone has choice except for you? So the way I explain it or encourage people to see it is like a row of dominoes. Look, you know, guilt is so self-destructive. With the exception of Bubby, we don't believe in Jewish guilt. Guilt is useless unless we transform it, use it as tshuva, as a mechanism to move forward and to grow. But simply to wrap yourself up in this blanket of self-pity and guilt and say, I'm worthless, I'm awful, I'm terrible, is just pointless. It's not what Hashem wants. You can't actualize your potential while you're busy blaming everyone else or beating yourself up because you haven't done enough. It doesn't work, and you'll forgive the plug, but I wrote a couple of books, and I don't recommend them all, but one of them I recommend is How Free Will Works, and there's a whole thing on about taking responsibility and why guilt and shame, toxic shame, is so destructive. Toxic shame and real shame are different, by the way. Just very, very quickly, and I know I'm going off in a couple of rabbit holes here, but real shame is a self-correcting mechanism. A person acts irresponsibly, they feel ashamed of their behavior. Right? That's normal. That is what Hashem wants us to feel because we acted beneath our madrega, and so we feel that are gnawing at our conscience, and we correct the behavior. Toxic shame is not my behavior means that I feel yucky, but your behavior towards me means that I feel yucky. Toxic shame is always through the lens of the ego, and it's a whole thing with childhood, and once again, the intricacies we'll save for another time. Maybe. But going back here again, so I encourage people to see it like dominoes, and that is that, look, if you banged into somebody to the right because you felt, and you feel bad about that, fair enough, do tshuva. But understand that person to the left of you also banged into you because someone else banged them, and so on. This doesn't mean for a second that we're not responsible for our actions, What it does mean is that when it comes to how we were treated, just allow for the possibility that this person was in an emotional wheelchair. In much the same way that a person can't get up and walk if they're in a physical wheelchair, you can't really blame somebody for being emotionally handicapped. So you can if you want to, but it's not accurate. And the problem here is this, is that if you believe that whoever the abuse came from, a parent, mother, father, sibling, whatever, if you assume that there was bechira, and here's the essence of this, if you assume that they had choice, then you have to assume that they did it because, again, as an egocentric child, of you, right? There's something wrong with you. See, if I don't have choice, I just did it. If someone gets abused, and they didn't have a choice, someone bangs into someone who bangs into me, it wasn't me. There's no way I can take responsibility. This guy spilled coffee on me. Maybe he should have been more careful. Someone banged into him, he bangs into me. Somebody splashes coffee on me, I'll begin to say, hey, what did I do to deserve this, right? So if we're able to see that how we were treated, right, this person may not really have had bechira, not have had choice. It not only allows for us to look at that person through a different lens, but ourselves. Because we no longer have to ask ourselves, what was so darn wrong about me that I deserve this behavior? Again, nothing. I know I'm throwing out a lot here, and I blame you, not me, by the way. And that is that again, let's take the other analogy, which I think is apt. Somebody comes along and they throw coffee on you, right? Your first response is, what did I do, right? And what's wrong with you? But if you see this person got bumped into and then their coffee went flying on you, you now can say, hey, I'm good. I didn't do anything to deserve this. And the poor Nebuch, the person who spilled coffee on you, they were just a victim themselves. Interesting way to look at it. When you begin to sort of, recast and reframe the past, it doesn't erase it, but it does allow for us to look at it through a little different lens. Some food for thought through the week. I wish you a beautiful week. Mir Hashem, see you back here next Motzi Shabbos. Have a great week. Thank you for listening and watching.